Honourable Members, I have received a letter from Hilary Calvert seeking to debate under Standing Order 380 the announcement today of a $6.85 million recovery package for Christchurch. This is a particular case of recent occurrence involving ministerial responsibility. The test for whether a particular case of recent occurrence requires the immediate attention of the House is a high one. The business of the House should not be set aside just because a ministerial statement has been made, even though it may be important. There must be an element of urgency that the matter must take precedence over other business. It is also relevant when considering whether a matter requires the urgent attention of the House to consider whether there are other parliamentary means of debating the subject. The House has before it today the financial review debate. This provides an opportunity to debate the current operations of the Ministry of Economic Development from where the $6.85 million funding will be realigned. I am not persuaded that the business of the House should be set aside today. The application is therefore declined. I call on Government Order of the Day number 1.
Appropriation 2009-10 Financial Review Bill, Committee stage.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of the Appropriations 2009-10 Financial Review Bill.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chairman.
Order. Members, those who wish to conduct a conversation, could you please use the lobbies? Members, the House is in committee on the Appropriation 2009-10 Financial Review Bill. Financial Review debate is the committee stage of the Appropriation Financial Review Bill. The time allocated for this debate is 4 hours and comprises of two distinct elements. The first is the debate on the annual financial statements of the government as reported on by the Finance and Expenditure Committee. Once this has concluded, the committee debates individual financial reviews of departments, offices of Parliament and non-departmental appropriations as reported by the Select Committee. The debate on the government's financial position may be a fairly wide-ranging one, but the debates on individual financial reviews of departments, offices of Parliament and non-departmental appropriations should be relevant to the performance in the 2009-10 financial year and their current operations. The compendium of financial reviews and non-departmental appropriations for debate is on the table. A member may have no more than 2 calls on each financial review. At the conclusion of the debate, a single question is put on the provisions of the bill. There is no amendment or debate to this question. The chairperson then reports the bill to the House and is set down for third reading forthwith. There is no debate on the third reading. Will members please turn to the report on the Finance and Expenditure Committee on the annual financial statements of the government. The question is that the report of the Finance and Expenditure Committee on the annual financial statements of the government for the year ending 30 June 2010 be noted. I note this report also relates to the Finance and Expenditure Committee's financial review of the Treasury, and so the performance in the 2010 financial year and current operations of the Treasury may also be debated. The floor is open for the call.
Mr. Chairman.
I call the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr. Chairman, it's hard to imagine a fiscal circumstance where this debate of the 2009-10 Financial Review Bill could be more important for New Zealanders, because the Crown's accounts that this debate seeks to discuss have taken or will take a hit to the tune of $8 to $10 billion from the recent 22 February and September 2010 earthquakes. That comes against the background, sir, of a recession which had gone on for months and months, years and years, longer than it should have done, and a government which had revised downwards sequentially at every budget update and half-yearly update its growth forecasts and its revenue forecasts, making the budgetary situation worse. So, Mr. Speaker, in these brief remarks this afternoon, I'm going to cover three key points. The first is the fiscal baseline from which this debate springs. Second, the important issues to do with the earthquake response and how it's funded. And thirdly, implications for ordinary New Zealanders of the fiscal position and what it means for the rising cost of living and the squeeze particularly on lower and middle income earners. Mr. Speaker, on the 18th of December 2008, the Minister sitting next to you, the Honourable Bill English, said, "I want to stress that New Zealand starts from a reasonable position in dealing with the uncertainty of our economic outlook. In New Zealand, we have room to respond. This is the rainy day that the government is saving up for." And he was referring, of course, to the onset of the global financial crisis, and the backdrop to that was that the Labor government had left the incoming national government with a net debt position which was actually a surplus to the tune of 4.7% of GDP in 2008, a net credit by the time the assets of the New Zealand Superannuation Fund, which the government's done its best to run down since then, were added to the very modest amount of debt that the government was then carrying, despite the urging of the now Minister of Finance to give tax cuts which would have worsened the fiscal position and further inflated the bubble of the preceding decade. But that was the starting point, Mr. Speaker. And it's a sad thing that today's debate is against the background that that relatively sound position has been beggared by two budgets which showed no more imagination than firstly to jeopardise New Zealand's superannuation and secondly to deliver $22 billion over 4 years in tax cuts, two-thirds of which went to upper income earners who did not need it. Two-thirds went to the top third. Two-thirds went to the top third who didn't need it and who didn't spend it all and for whom it was lost from the economy. Lost from stimulus, making the recession deeper and longer, keeping people out of jobs and making the fiscal position more difficult in periods to come. And so it was no surprise to us, sir, that the recession ground on. A little spark of hope in 2009, snuffed out by a deteriorating position all of last year, with a negative third quarter after a faltering mid-year, and every prospect that we will have zero or very low growth in the fourth quarter, possibly even negative. This is not the global recession, this is National's recession. This is the recession brought on by $22 billion of misdirected tax cuts and a lack of a growth plan. It is a human-induced tragedy fueled by a lack of planning and a lack of imagination by that government. So then the earthquake hit. Now that's not the government's fault, and I think all members of this House have been at pains to show that we are putting Canterbury first and politics second in respect of the response to that earthquake. Our top priority all around this House has quite rightly been to get resources flowing to Christchurch, to stabilise, to support the people of Christchurch, to commence the rebuild, and we remain in support of the government's broad objectives in that respect. But what is disturbing to me, sir, is that in the last week in particular, the government's fiscal response to that earthquake has been all over the mat, all over the road like a drunk driver behind the wheel of a car. Last week, the Minister of Finance told this House that it would be fine for the government to bear the whole, Mr. Chairman, for the government to bear the whole cost of the earthquake response, be it $8 billion or $10 billion, roughly half of out-of-pocket infrastructure costs and half of lost tax revenue that has to be made up, all of it on debt, none of it on expenditure reprioritisation, and none of it on a revenue response, be that a levy or a backing off of some of those tax cuts. It was an extraordinary position, and our colleague Dr. Russell Norman rightly pointed out that was a highly fiscally irresponsible position. Well, no surprise that on Sunday on nationwide TV, the Prime Minister confirmed that it was a highly fiscally irresponsible position and overrode it and said we will have a zero new expenditure budget in 2011. And I just ask New Zealanders to pinch themselves for a second. No, you're not dreaming. That is not the ghost of Ruth Richardson. That is a real statement by the current Prime Minister, which will be the most radical surgery to the public sector that we have known in 2 decades. And coming in the middle of a recession, Mr. Chairman, it is a highly dangerous surgery from which the patient may not recover. It is dangerous because it will suck demand out of the economy, it will prolong the recession, it will make tax receipts lower, and it will create and produce a doom loop from which this economy will be lucky to recover before the change of government. And it's no surprise, Mr. Chairman, that it took the International Monetary Fund to raise the alarm in the 9th floor for the Minister of Finance to be overridden on Q&A on Sunday. The International Monetary Fund is calling the shots in the beehive, not the Minister of Finance, because he's been rolled in the last week. Absolutely rolled because his whack-it-on-the-bill strategy has been canned by the Prime Minister, who says, no, we're going to cut the lot to pay for it. Well, what will that mean for ordinary New Zealanders, Mr. Chairman? Well, what it means is, firstly, the Prime Minister's out of touch. There's a man who would have got well over $1,000 a week out of his own tax cuts, because the man is a man of means. He's a man of independent and private wealth. How did he get there? By being one of those fancy-pants money men who brought the world to its knees in the global financial crisis. He was a paper shuffler and a money trader, and he took a cool $50 million for himself. And that's why he's out of touch today with the hard-working New Zealanders up and down the country who every time they go to the supermarket are asking how come this trolley of groceries is costing $20 or $50 more than it seemed like it did last week. And how come when we're going to the petrol station it's costing me $100 to fill up a small car with gas. $100. My little Toyota Prius, $100 last week. Broke the 100 limit for the first time in history. I can afford it. I'm an MP. I'm on 130 grand, not as much as the Prime Minister's dividends, but enough to get by. And there's a hell of a lot. In fact, about 90% of New Zealanders are on less than that. And in fact, 70% of New Zealanders are on less than the average. Let's not forget. 70% of New Zealanders are on less than the average, and I honestly say I do not know how people are bringing up families with the cost of living rising the way it is at the moment, and a government that doesn't care. And for a family that can barely pay the bills and is dependent on government support to have low doctors' fees and good quality public schools and good quality hospitals, John Key's just kicked them in the guts, because he said there will be no new money in this year's budget. Anything that goes to health and education is coming out of something else. Except not the holiday highway. That's sacrosanct. Not the new missiles for the frigates. They're sacrosanct. It's going to come out of stuff ordinary people use, because that seems to be the way of the world. And in the last couple of weeks we've had Stephen Joyce running around cutting cosy deals with the broadcasting industry in an election year. Shame. Shame. I don't care whether he sold his shares or not. That ought to be a breach of the Electoral Finance Act. And then doing a cosy deal with Telecom to hand the telco and the broadband market back to them on a plate and beggar the rest of the industry. He may know where his bread is buttered, but it's on a different side of the loaf to ordinary Kiwis who are struggling, who are finding rising rent and power and petrol and food and GST on everything is just getting desperate, Mr. Chairman.
I call Craig Foss.